The sharp click of heels on marble echoed through the halls of the Dallas County Courthouse, slicing through the hush like a warning shot. It was 9:43 a.m., precisely 13 minutes late, and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, dressed in a navy blue power suit and holding a leather briefcase, strode through the courtroom doors. The room was already full, lawyers seated, reporters watching, and Judge Ronald E. Mercer tapping his gavel with a look that had made seasoned attorneys flinch. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She'd been on a tense early morning call with the Department of Homeland Security, mediating a crisis involving a sudden ICE raid in her district that was detaining undocumented students. She hadn't planned to be in court at all this morning, certainly not for something as trivial as a parking violation appeal, a citation issued outside her campaign office during a community food drive weeks ago. But here she was, summoned, as the paperwork said, to demonstrate respect for the rule of law. She had barely made it through the courtroom doors when Judge Mercer snapped, "Representative Crockett, this court convened at 9:30 sharp." "My apologies, Your Honor," Jasmine replied, catching her breath but holding his gaze. "I had to intervene in a federal immigration matter involving my constituents. I believe the court received—" "I don't care if you were on the phone with the Pope," Mercer cut her off, his voice as brittle as dry bone. "This is my courtroom. You show up late, you show disrespect. And for that, you are held in contempt. A $500 fine, payable immediately." There was a slight stir in the gallery. A few gasps. Someone muttered, "Seriously?" A reporter began scribbling faster. Jasmine's jaw tightened, but she said nothing at first. She stepped to the defense table, placing her briefcase down gently. Then she looked up. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I believe the court is exhibiting a double standard. I have watched 2 white male defendants enter late this morning and receive a verbal warning. No fines, no contempt rulings. Are you accusing this court of bias?" Mercer leaned forward, voice low and dangerous. "I'm not accusing," Jasmine said coolly. "I'm observing. And your record, Your Honor, shows a pattern. I've reviewed your rulings on young defendants, particularly women of color, and the data supports my observation." The courtroom fell into a heavy silence. Even the bailiff looked uncertain. Mercer's face flushed a deeper shade of red. "You come into my court, flout my rules, then try to lecture me on how I apply the law. I won't tolerate grandstanding. Here, Representative Crockett." Jasmine didn't back down. "It's not grandstanding to ask for consistency. It's my duty, both as a citizen and a congresswoman, to call it out when the scales of justice tilt unfairly. You're on thin ice, and yet I'm still standing." The tension thickened like fog. Mercer banged his gavel. "Enough! One more word, and I'll have you escorted out." She took a slow breath, then sat, dignified and silent, but the air around her bristled with unspoken defiance. The rest of the proceedings were a formality. The original parking citation was dismissed, probably out of embarrassment more than anything, but the contempt fine remained. Jasmine refused to pay it immediately. She wanted it on the record. Outside the courthouse, microphones swarmed. "Congresswoman, do you believe the judge acted inappropriately? Are you going to appeal the contempt charge? Was this racially motivated?" Jasmine raised a hand, silencing the questions. "What you saw in that courtroom isn't new. It's just usually quieter, more polite. Today it was loud, and I think it's time we listen." That quote would be clipped, looped, and shared millions of times over the next 24 hours. Inside the courthouse, however, Judge Mercer was fuming. Alone in his chambers, he called in his clerk. "Find everything you can on her. If she wants a war, I'll give her one." Unbeknownst to him, the wheels of something much larger were already turning. A law professor at SMU, watching the live stream, had begun pulling Mercer's last 5 years of court records. A junior reporter at the Dallas Tribune started digging into prior contempt rulings. A congressional staffer forwarded the courtroom footage to a member of the Judiciary Committee in D.C. The showdown wasn't over. It was just getting started, and Jasmine Crockett wasn't backing down. The courthouse. Confrontation had lit a fuse that was now burning in every direction, through newsrooms, legal circles, and Capitol Hill. By nightfall, the video of Jasmine standing tall in the face of Judge Mercer's contempt ruling had amassed over 6 million views. The hashtags contempt of bias and justice for Jasmine were trending nationally. Yet inside that Dallas courtroom, Mercer hadn't felt the blast wave just yet. He still believed this was a skirmish he could squash with pressure and protocol. By morning, Jasmine was back, not in court, but on the steps of the same courthouse, facing a wall of reporters. "I will not pay that fine," she said, voice crisp. "Not until the conduct of Judge Mercer is reviewed by the Texas Commission on Judicial Conduct. This isn't about me. It's about how the law is applied differently depending on who's sitting at the defense table." Her words rang with clarity and force. She wasn't just defending herself, she was indicting a system. Inside, Mercer watched from his private office. "She wants to make this political," he muttered to himself. "Then fine. Let's make it political." And so he did. The following day, a sudden motion appeared on the docket. In Re. Crockett, Jasmine, motion to escalate sanctions for willful contempt. It was absurd. No legal basis. Just a blunt instrument meant to intimidate. Jasmine's legal team filed an immediate motion to quash. It was clear Mercer wanted to bait her into a second courtroom appearance, this time not as a public servant defending principle, but as a woman fighting off personal consequences. Her allies advised her to let lawyers handle it. But Jasmine knew better. "People need to see it," she said. "They need to see what unchecked power looks like." So on the third day, she walked back into Mercer's courtroom, deliberately 15 minutes early. The gallery was full. Every bench, packed, even C-SPAN was filming. Jasmine sat quietly at the same table as before, back straight, eyes locked on the judge's bench. Judge Mercer entered, robes sweeping behind him, face set in granite. He barely glanced at Jasmine before calling the court to order. "We are here to address the respondent's continued defiance," he began. "Congresswoman or not, no one is above the authority of this court." "I've never claimed to be," Jasmine said, standing slowly. "But I'm also not beneath your scrutiny, because I challenged it. If asking for consistency and fairness is considered defiance in this courtroom, then perhaps the problem is not with me." Mercer leaned forward. "You are dangerously close to being held in criminal contempt. Do you wish to continue this performance?" "This isn't a performance, Your Honor. This is accountability, and I intend to see it through." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Mercer's jaw clenched. He motioned to the bailiff. "Remove her from this courtroom if she speaks out again." But the bailiff hesitated. That moment, small, silent, spoke volumes. The bailiff, a black man in his 50s, locked eyes with Jasmine, then back to the judge. He didn't move. Jasmine turned to the court recorder. "Please note for the record, the judge has threatened to remove me for exercising my right to respond to accusations made publicly, while refusing to address his own documented pattern of disproportionate sanctions against younger minority defendants." "Enough!" Mercer barked, slamming the gavel. "This is my courtroom." "No," Jasmine said evenly. "This is the people's courtroom, and they're watching." And they were. Live stream numbers surged past 800,000 mid-proceeding. In Washington, staffers were glued to monitors. On social media, legal experts began dissecting Mercer's conduct in real time. Clips went viral showing him issuing harsher penalties to young Black and Latino defendants for offenses nearly identical to those of older white peers. Outside, protesters gathered with signs, "Equal justice isn't optional, bias isn't law, and we stand with Jasmine." Then came the turning point. As tensions peaked, an email surfaced, leaked from a former law clerk of Mercer's. In it, the judge had referred to these TikTok politicians as brats who think they can run the country without learning respect for real authority. The email was authenticated within hours and sent to the Texas Judicial Oversight Board. At that point, the courthouse was no longer just a courtroom. It was ground zero for a national reckoning. Later that afternoon, Jasmine held a press briefing. "I came here to challenge one citation. Instead, I uncovered a pattern that shows what many have long suspected, that justice is not always blind, and sometimes it wears a robe. This isn't about one judge, it's about many, and it's time we bring light into every dark corner of this system." The press conference went viral. By evening, 2 members of the Texas state legislature announced they were launching a bipartisan inquiry into judicial bias. The American Bar Association released a statement urging review of Mercer's conduct and broader judicial behavior patterns. And quietly, deep inside the offices of the Texas Commission on Judicial Conduct, an internal review was greenlit, targeting not just Mercer's handling of the Crockett case, but 5 years of his rulings. Still, Jasmine had not paid the fine. Still, Mercer refused to back down, and so the two remained locked in standoff, 2 towering figures on opposite ends of the justice system. But momentum had begun to shift. Mercer could feel it. Jasmine had turned a courtroom reprimand into a national referendum. She wasn't just winning, she was changing the rules. And Judge Ronald Mercer felt it like a tremor under his feet. Steady, growing, inevitable. For over 20 years, he had ruled his courtroom like a fortress, stern, unquestioned, and insulated from scrutiny. But Jasmine Crockett had cracked something. Not just the illusion of impartiality in his chambers, but the comfort he'd long taken in believing his authority was absolute. Now, every ruling he'd made in the last decade was under review. Every file, every transcript, every offhand remark caught in courtroom audio. Jasmine hadn't just stood up to him, she'd exposed him. Still, Mercer had one move left. On the 4th day, a surprise emergency hearing appeared on the docket. It was labeled Final Disposition of Contempt Charge, Crockett. Rumors swirled that Mercer was preparing to escalate the charge, possibly pushing for criminal contempt, which could involve jail time. It was a calculated risk, but he was betting Jasmine wouldn't go that far. That she'd take a deal, end the public spectacle, save her career. But he didn't know Jasmine Crockett. By now, the courtroom was standing room only. Lines stretched out the courthouse doors. Civil rights attorneys, law students, pastors, mothers with young daughters, all came to watch. What they already understood wasn't just legal drama. It was a showdown between the old guard and the future. Mercer entered late. Deliberately, some thought. He adjusted his robe, sat, and fixed his gaze on Jasmine, who stood flanked by her legal team, but very much alone in her defense. "This court convenes for final disposition on the matter of contempt," Mercer began, voice clipped. "Representative Crockett has been given multiple opportunities to apologize, to de-escalate this matter, and to comply with this court's orders. She has refused at every turn." "I've refused to be silent," Jasmine corrected, standing. Mercer didn't even look up. "This court is considering whether her continued defiance constitutes criminal contempt, which may carry consequences beyond financial penalties." That sparked immediate murmurs. The gallery stirred. A reporter's phone buzzed with a breaking alert, but Jasmine stayed composed. "Your Honor," she said, voice steady but forceful, "before you rule, I respectfully request the court take judicial notice of Exhibit A." She nodded to her co-counsel, who handed the court clerk a sealed binder. The clerk walked it to Mercer's bench. Mercer frowned. "What is this?" "The full summary of your contempt rulings from the past 5 years," Jasmine said, "compiled by an independent team of legal analysts and verified by 2 civil rights organizations. It shows that over 78% of your contempt citations were issued to defendants under 35, and over 60% were people of color. He rifled through the pages, his frown deepening. And that's not all, she continued. The Texas Commission on Judicial Conduct received over 40 complaints against your courtroom in the past 3 years, 6 of which were submitted by attorneys after my case began. This is no longer about one incident, Your Honor. It's about the culture you've created in this courtroom. The gallery erupted. Mercer pounded his gavel. Order! I will not allow this court to be hijacked. It already was, Jasmine said, cutting him off. Long before I walked in. The only difference is, now the country sees it. At that moment, a sharp knock echoed from the courtroom doors. 2 officers from the Texas Commission on Judicial Conduct entered, followed by a commissioner herself, a woman in a burgundy blazer with a file in hand. I apologize for the interruption, Your Honor, she said, standing at the bar, but we are serving you with a formal notice of investigation and immediate suspension pending review. Silence hit the courtroom like a gunshot. Mercer's face paled. You have no authority here, he spat. We do now, the commissioner said, under emergency provisions triggered by credible evidence of judicial misconduct. The bailiff, same one who had hesitated days earlier, slowly approached Mercer. Sir, I'll need your gavel. Mercer stood, trembling. This is an outrage. No, Jasmine said, stepping forward. This is justice. He turned to her, eyes blazing, but said nothing. He knew it was over. The system he had lorded over now closed around him. Not vindictively, but decisively. The gavel was passed to a temporary magistrate. Mercer left the bench, escorted but not handcuffed. The symbolism was enough. The courtroom exhaled. In the days that followed, the fallout was seismic. The Texas judiciary announced sweeping reforms, mandatory annual bias training for judges, oversight committees empowered to review courtroom behavior, and a public reporting tool for defendants and attorneys to file judicial conduct concerns anonymously. Congress took note. Several lawmakers introduced federal legislation encouraging similar reforms across all states. Jasmine returned to Washington not as a defendant, but as a leader of a movement. In an address from the House floor, she said, "Contempt of court should never be used to silence truth. It should never be a weapon to punish dissent. I stood up because too many can't. And now, we are one step closer to a legal system that reflects the values it claims to uphold." The speech drew a standing ovation. Weeks later, the $500 contempt fine was formally vacated, quietly, without comment, by the new interim judge. But by then, it didn't matter. Jasmine had already won far more than a dismissal. She'd won a reckoning. 1 year later, law schools began citing Crockett versus Mercer as a pivotal case study in courtroom power, dynamics, and systemic bias. And though Jasmine never sought the spotlight that came from that courtroom battle, she used it, turning a citation into a catalyst, a confrontation into a cause. Not just for herself, but for everyone who'd ever been told to sit down, shut up, and accept injustice in the name of decorum. Jasmine Crockett didn't just challenge the system, she changed it.